So when Product School reached out to me a month or so ago and said, would you be willing to come and talk? The answer was absolutely yes. And the reason for that is around 3 years ago, when I myself was considering what I wanted to do, I actually attended one or two of these sessions and they were super helpful to me. I think I attended one here and one at another location. So for me, this is awesome and would love to pay it forward. I've now started interviewing for Facebook and have seen a couple of candidates that have come and said that they're interested in PM partly because of Product School. So I think this is an awesome work that Product School is doing to create like a community, and it's just increasing the PM pipeline. So happy to pay it forward and excited that everyone's here. Today's talk, I can talk a little bit about myself and then we'll sort of get into the meat of the material. So today's talk is titled What Surprised Me About Being a PM at Facebook. And I'll talk a little bit about that, but honestly here to help. And so we can spend some time talking about the material I've prepared, but then hopefully use the remaining time for any and all questions that you all have. Okay, so start a little bit about me. I spent most of my childhood in the East Coast, but was actually born in India. I went then to school at the University of Michigan, where I studied business and computer science. And then some fun stuff outside work, reading, listening to podcasts, like I think everyone in the Bay does these days, hiking, traveling. And then I'm also a volunteer instructor at the Coding School, which is a nonprofit that helps teach kids across the globe who do not have access to computer science education how to code. So I've been doing that for a while and was paired with a student in Portugal. Super cool experience. Okay, so I think something I get asked a lot by people is like, why did you go into tech and why did you want to become a PM? So I'll sort of walk you through the journey, and it sounds linear here, but it really isn't. When I was in high school, I decided to take a computer science course because that was the thing at the time being, and you were living on the East Coast, and that was, everyone was like, or my parents were like, you should do this, otherwise you're not going to get a job. So therefore, I signed up. And quite frankly, it was the course I did the worst in high school. I think I almost got a C and like barely scraped by. And was so by like at some point in senior year, I decided, okay, not going to do this at all. Do not see a future in technology, like going to do something else. And I don't know what that something was. The thing that changed, or one of the things that changed, was I attended a hackathon that was held by a local university, and I went there. And that was just a really defining experience because it was awesome to see people with almost as little experience as me building apps that could become the next Facebook or Google. And that's the first time I truly understood the potential of technology and why it was interesting to me. At this hackathon, I went and talked to, I think it was a Google or a Yahoo recruiter, I can't remember which one. And I pretty much told them, I was like, look, super interested in this tech stuff, but I can't code for my life. Like, what can I do? And they, at that point, mentioned, well, we've got this thing called a PM role. And that's like what got the wheels turning, and have been thinking about that since then. In college, I initially came undeclared, tested out a bunch of things, but ended up doing computer science and business. It still wasn't sure about the PM role, but was trying it out. I did a couple software engineering and TPM internships. So technical program manager, if you all are familiar with that, or technical project manager. And in all those roles, I thought that the role I had was really interesting, but I thought that the role of the PM that was working with me was even more cool. And the way I think I break it down at the end of the day is like why I want to be a PM is I was always more interested in the slide should say why and what, not why and why. I was always more interested in the why and the what rather than the how. So what does this mean? The why to me is answering the question of like, what are we trying to achieve? What's the goal and everything else? And once you have the goal, then you're like, okay, what are we going to build to achieve that goal? And then how is really executing on it. Like, what is the systems we're going to build? How are we going to architect it? What does it look like? And what I found was as an engineer, I was spending a lot of time on the how, but not as much on the what and the why. And that's really what got me to be interested in PM and pursue it. And then after that, I came to Facebook. So for most introductory PMs, if you don't have experience in PM programs, there are now like what's called associate PM programs that exist in a lot of places in the Valley. So I joined the equivalent of that at Facebook, which is the Facebook RPM program, Rotational Product Manager. The idea is pretty much, it's for people who have less than 2 years of PM experience, but can come from literally any background. So a lot of people like me have some technical experience, There are some people who have come from an MBA, or some people who have completely diverse experiences, such as entertainment or music or arts, and someone studied architecture. And so the idea is like product talent can come from anywhere. And these programs are helpful to get people grounded and give them a diverse exposure to experiences. So I did that. It's honestly one of the best decisions I've made. Facebook's obviously a fantastic company to work for, but more than anything else, it was just awesome to have a cohort of PMs that I was working and learning with that were sort of going through the same thing as me. And this is a group of this cohort that we took a research trip to South Africa. And so this is a picture of us there. During the program, the way the program is structured is you do 3 rotations of around 6 months each. And then after that, you continue on a role at Facebook. So here are the things I worked at. And then I can talk a little bit about what each one of those are and what I'm doing now. So the first team I worked on was the Facebook Pages team. Facebook Pages are the product that you use if you're an organization, any size, from being a nonprofit to being middle stage, like something like product school, to be like a large company like Google. If you have a presence on Facebook, it's likely through a page on Facebook. This is one of the most legacy products because it's been there since Facebook has had business tools, so over a decade. I was specifically working on the insights team. So you see this product right here for anyone who has had a Facebook page. It tells you a little bit about how your page is doing. How many people have seen content, how many people have clicked on it, how many people have converted, how is your ad spend ROI. Also a product that has existed for a long time. What we started learning was that our biggest advertisers were doing pretty well because we had specific agents to support them. But our small and medium businesses, which we care a lot about, found these tools to be really cluttered. And so my team came in and was trying to revamp this experience to make insights more understandable. So if you're a fruit seller in Thailand that had just opened up a Facebook page to connect with people around you, the idea of metrics or reach and engagement are really intimidating. So how can we quote unquote dumb that down a little bit and then also make it a little more actionable? And this was my first experience working in product at Facebook. So the impact we had was we were actually able to increase business engagement and then eventually advertiser spend, which was awesome. But for me personally, this was my first time getting my feet wet as a PM and working in the big Facebook environment. Then completely different role in the spirit of the rotations, wanted to pick something completely different. So then I worked on the election integrity team. So as you all know, post 2016, Facebook has rightly been in the news and has had a lot of scrutiny for the amount of misinformation and other issues that have been on the platform. In 2019, so a year ago, we had a lot of elections happening around the globe in India, European Union, Indonesia, Nigeria, other places. And so I joined the election integrity and misinformation team. And our team was trying to work to reduce the spread of false news in these elections. The engineering work was mostly machine learning engineers that could build algorithms to detect things that were potentially false. And that was cool in itself. But a lot of my work was actually communicating first with a lot of our global stakeholders. When you have elections happening across the globe, we're working with teams in New Delhi, Jakarta, different places in the European Union, Lagos, to help us understand what are the problems in those markets, and for us to communicate to them the tools that we're building. And this was important so that those teams, we could have their buy-in and work with them, but also so that they could then communicate the role that Facebook was playing externally to the press and the media. And then also, because of how sensitive this was, had a lot of interactions with senior executives to get alignment on what our strategy was and pivot based on external input. So super, super cool experience. Yeah, I think the biggest learnings from this one were definitely communication to various groups of stakeholders that I did not have to work with in a very more traditional PM role. And then finally decided to switch it up again. It was okay, let me pick something completely different that I don't know anything about. So I worked on and am continue to work on Oculus, which is our virtual reality and augmented reality division. So Facebook bought Oculus in July 2014, which is about 5.5 years ago. And since then, we've been working on VR and now AR. And so I was working on something called the Oculus Quest, which is our new device in market. If you're someone that is not new to VR and trying to try it out, this is definitely the best device out there. And we were working to build a home page. So when you put it on, it says, "Hey, Abby, what do you want to play today?" And it's somewhere between a Facebook news feed and a Netflix homepage. And for example, here you can see we launched this feature which lets developers of games share to their community what they're building. Once again, interesting experience because this time it was completely new technology. This is something that Facebook itself was very new at, and so there was a lot of learnings in that regard. And my first time building a product that involved developers, because a lot of what you're building when you're building a VR headset is a platform for games. So this was a little bit of my experience. Okay, sorry. So when I was thinking about what I would share, I think the two questions that came to mind are, what are the things that I wish I had known before I had taken this job as a PM and also working at Facebook, so a combination of both. And then what are the learnings that might help others that are going through a similar journey? So that's sort of what I want to communicate today. And I've broken it down to like 7 key takeaways in a very PM fashion, but we can expand on any of them as needed. Okay, so the number one question I get when people reach out to me applying for PM roles is this: is knowing how to code helpful in doing a PM gig? How many people, actually, let me poll this group. How many people have either wondered or asked this question? Okay, decent amount. So I definitely thought about this a lot as well. I was like, okay, is this an advantage? Is this a disadvantage? There's a separate answer to what this means for recruiting for a PM role. I'm not going to answer that right now, but we can talk about this. But in terms of actually doing the role, I think the answer is yes. It does help, but not necessarily in the way you think it might. So when I was starting at Facebook beforehand, I was like, man, I haven't coded in a while. I should brush up on my technical skills expecting to code. And the first or second day on onboarding at Facebook, you need to build a web page. And I was like, oh man, this is going to be quite a struggle if this is part of my job. But since then, I have written 0 lines of code, and I think everyone in the world is better for that, because if I was shipping code, probably not great products were being built. But I have actually found my technical skills to be helpful, and it's more in terms of the relationships you build with technical people. I think that bringing a technical background to a team that you're working with engineers, data scientists, or other technical folk helps in building mutual trust when you join, because they can understand that, okay, you've studied computer science, so okay, you sort of maybe know what you're doing. They can treat you as thought partners while you're making decisions, and then you're also more likely to be able to discuss technical architecture, but at a higher level. So that's what I found helpful. Now, caveat, does this mean that if you don't have a technical degree, you can't do any of these things? Absolutely not. A lot of the PMs that I work with have even less technical background than I do, and are probably better in some of these cases, or all of these things, than I am. But the thing is, the ramp takes a little longer, especially on the relationship building. Because if you come in with no technical experience, it might require you more time to build that credibility. So that, in a nutshell, is where I've found CS experience to be helpful in doing the role. Okay, Facebook has a reputation of being a very, very data-driven company. And to some extent, this is very true. The company is known for focusing on metrics, and quite frankly, that's what has gotten us to 2.6+ billion users, right? The biggest thing that has ever existed on planet Earth. However, when I came in, I was like, okay, well, clearly this means that my job as a PM is to set a metric, and then as long as I'm crushing the goal, I'm succeeding. And what you come to realize as a PM is that data is part of what qualifies as success, but it's not everything. And one of my mentors at Facebook has referenced this quote, which is by a Nobel laureate in economics, which is, no one ever made a decision because of a number. They need a story. And this goes back to like a fundamental thing in human psychology, that we are not wired to understand numbers on a chart. We are like, and always have been, storytellers, and that's what we are receptive to. So what that means is that the most successful PMs I've seen are able to use data along with user research and market insights to build a narrative for what their product should be, what success looks like, what this impact will be on the user base. And when I started thinking about data as a vital input and not necessarily the outcome, it was like fundamentally, a different way of thinking that really helped me and my time at Facebook. So I think that that's like the key thing, that when you're a product manager, metrics are important and they are a part of the story, but the more important thing is you need to communicate a narrative for what this product is. Also think there's another element to this from your own career standpoint. And this, may or may not be true for every place or every person, but what I've seen at Facebook is from the performance, like how are you evaluated? A lot of people come thinking in, once again, that if you beat metrics, then you will, get a raise or get promoted and get a good rating. And that's kind of true. Like, yes, metrics are important, but even in your own career, you have to sort of be the PM of your own career, and there's a narrative that's important there too. So when people do performance review at Facebook, the thing they're looking at is, okay, so this is what the team was before person A joined. This is how the team is after they joined. What is the delta and how much can be contributed to them? There's a lot that goes behind it, but that's essentially it. And there's no clean answer or any metric that will tell you that. It's your job to have a narrative around how you were able to enable your team to do that. So it has the narrative has an implication both on the product standpoint, but also in how you PM your own career. Okay, so caveating this one, I have not, I interned, but I've never really worked at a startup. So I cannot empathize with the resource constraints that a startup goes through. And I also know that I am so lucky to be working at a big company that has a lot of resources, right? We'll caveat that before I even start this out. But when I came in, I was like, okay, working at Facebook, they have unlimited capital. I will never have issues with any, getting enough people to help me out on anything. My first project, we started and we're like, okay, this is how much engineering, design, data science we got. And they're like, cool, you're going to get like 30% of each. And I was like, what? Like, this is not what I expected, coming to a big company. And what I came to realize was that, yes, for Facebook and for other big technology companies, they are pretty well resourced, no denying it. But the resourcing is also proportional to the scale of their ambitions. So yes, Facebook, we announced last week in our earnings that we have 44,000 people working, full-time employees for us, but there's also a billion things that we're trying to do. The other thing that you realize, and it's probably more important, is that the real bottleneck for big tech is not money, it's actually talent. All tech companies that you see, large tech companies, they have a lot of capital that's available for them to deploy and for them to hire people. But finding talent is more, and allocating talent is actually more difficult. And this is for a couple of reasons. One, it's hard to hire. You all know, if you've worked in Silicon Valley, that it's pretty hard to find awesome engineers and other scarce roles. Second, unlike dollars, where you can move them around, these are actual people. You can't just tell someone to start a project and then 2 weeks later be like, go do some other project. So when you're actually assigning an engineer on a team, it's a commitment to actually build something. And so someone, when I joined at Facebook, made this joke that it is harder for you to get one engineer on your team than it is to get $1 million. Maybe exaggerated, may not be true, but I think there is a degree of truth to that. So what is the implication of this for a product manager? One of your biggest jobs is to be able to convince the people around you and your leaders that what you are doing is worth resourcing. We do this on a cycle, but that's an important thing. If you want to succeed, you need to be able to pitch people to be like, hey, this deserves resourcing, but then also to be able to pitch people that are wanting to join your team and tell them, amongst the 10 other teams you could be joining at Facebook, this is why this is the coolest thing for you to do. So that was another learning that I didn't realize was going to be a part of the job. Another thing that I've found interesting as I've learned about and worked in different areas of Facebook is that the product culture is very significant. So any people at any company will tell you that what product managers do varies from team to team and from org to org and from product to product. But I think that at Facebook, while there's a shared sense of values, the culture is very, very different based on what product you're working on. And this sort of makes sense because each of our flagship products are different products. And therefore, the culture that creates those products needs to be different. If you just think about Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp, all of them are used by billions of people across the globe, but serve different needs and have different use cases. Some overlapping, but largely different. And that's why they're all successful products. And that was pretty interesting for me to internalize. Like, okay, what does this mean for the product culture? So I'll go by each one of them and like help break down what each one looks like. Starting with Facebook, which we internally refer to as Big Blue now because the company is Facebook and we have multiple apps within them. So it gets confusing when you say Facebook, the company, and Facebook, the app. So when you talk about Blue, the values really for Blue are that data wins arguments, and move fast. So what does this mean? This means that when you're coming up with a new idea, the incentive is to think about how can we build a minimum viable product to test this. It doesn't have to be perfect, but let's just get something out and get some signal. We have billions of users, let's see how they respond to it. And then using that signal, you'll iterate to that product and then finally get it to a place where it'll be an awesome thing. So the implications of this are very data-driven. Clearly, one of the fastest growing things that has ever existed because of that. And this data-driven decision-making allows you to move faster because you free yourself a little bit of the decision-making and just say, like, let's let users tell us what they like. And metrics can tell us that. The downside is, and you may see this if you've used Facebook, is it leads to a little bit of a cluttered product because you're building so many things. Facebook is now a newsfeed, a marketplace, a dating service, a news tab, groups for you to find people, et cetera, right? And all are used by a lot of people, but it leads to clutter. The other thing that you can think about here is that sometimes there are issues with quality. And I think we've gotten way better at this for what it's worth, but if you're shipping things that are MVPs that are not perfect, you may run into that. Then you go like in the spectrum to Instagram, which is somewhere in the middle. Instagram's values are craft and simplicity, and they want to put people first. So like Facebook, you use data in the ideation phase, and you think about, okay, how big is this opportunity? Why would we want to build this? And all those things are there. But the big difference is that at Instagram, there's a strong belief that you don't want to test anything unless you would ship it. So the bar for quality is much higher. And they would never run an A/B test unless it's something that they feel confident releasing to 100% of people. So that means that you have to have more conviction before you're actually building something, because you're going to have to spend more resourcing to make it better. And therefore, product managers have to spend more time convincing everyone else as to why this is important and why we should be building it. You can't just be like, oh, well, we don't know, let's just test it. Implications. The product is much simpler, right, for anyone who's used Instagram or Facebook, but internally, we move a little slower. And finally, WhatsApp is on the complete opposite side of the spectrum, right? WhatsApp is largely a messaging app. And for those of you, how many people use WhatsApp? Okay. For most people that use WhatsApp, it's actually pretty hard to point out significant things that have changed in the UI, right? Facebook and Instagram change a lot, but WhatsApp has been the same thing for a long time. They'll make incremental small changes, but a lot of time you won't even notice them. And this is actually intentional. If you think about WhatsApp's user base, a lot of it is in emerging markets. They're low literate users. They often can't read what is on their screen. And so changing stuff around is actually very difficult because they're using just muscle memory to figure it out. So WhatsApp's values are simplicity and reliability. The incentive is to try to keep things as much the same as possible and make sure we're not disrupting the user experience, which means that there needs to be an overwhelming evidence that users want this before shipping a new product. And so internally, probably the best on quality, best on stability, and perhaps user trust, although that's hard to measure. But the lead cycles are much longer. There's no deadlines, really, and so it's hard to figure out when things will ship. So just in one company, you can see sort of the spectrum of this. And for me, I guess the implication takeaway is like you can learn so much by being a PM in just one company, but by working in different environments. I think also the other implication is probably as you get later in your career, you'll start to figure out where you fit on the spectrum and where you should go. When I started as a PM, I was like, oh man, I finally have this authority to do things. So I'm going to spend time thinking about every single decision and make sure I get it right. And there's this temptation to microanalyze. And that actually leads to failure. because one of the interesting things that I've come to realize is if there was perfect data or input to help you make a decision, it wouldn't be a decision because someone would have made it already. A decision is when there's usually incomplete data. And then they'll be, okay, it's the PM's job now to sort of arbitrate. Like, okay, we think this on this side, but this on this side, what should we do? And I spent a lot of times in my early career at Facebook spending time on this. And then I got advice from my manager and my mentors that I was doing the wrong thing. And they pointed me to a version of the quote from Jeff Bezos, which talks about one-way doors versus two-way doors. So one-way doors are decisions that when you make them, they're incredibly hard, if not impossible to reverse. And so those require a lot of time, and you should think about them a lot. These happen very commonly on hardware, in some cases on software when it's like a fundamental product change or a brand change. But a lot of decisions, especially if you're working on software, are two-way doors, where, okay, we can test this out, we can learn what we learn, and then we can reverse it if we don't like it. So the big takeaway that I got from this experience was to spend most of my time thinking about the one-way doors, or the things that were closer to the one-way doors on the spectrum, and less time on the two-way doors. On the two-way doors, I was happy to delegate to others who had more of a context or more of an opinion. And this helped me scale as a PM and prioritize my time efficiently. All right, only two more to go. Okay, this is more of a Facebook learning, less of a PM learning. But when I ask people who have joined Facebook from other companies, and I ask them, okay, what is the thing that surprised you the most about Facebook? Or being a PM at Facebook. And the thing they mention is that, especially if you're coming from other big tech companies, is how bottoms up the culture is. And once again, Facebook is obviously not a startup, right? This is no longer in someone's dorm room, and it has got thousands of people. So yes, there is some degree of bureaucracy, there is leadership that steps in. But in spite of that, they have incredibly managed to maintain a relatively bottoms-up culture. What this means is that leadership at each level sets the strategy of like, okay, what do we want Facebook to be in 5 years? Or what do we want Oculus to be in 5 years? But beyond that, it is up to individual teams to set the mission, vision, and strategy for their products, pitch new ideas, and prioritize amongst them. So I think there's like people ask, do you like this? Well, I think it's one of those things with great power comes great responsibility. So on one hand, PMs and teams are given a lot of autonomy into decision making. And that's awesome. It's really freeing that you are given the liberty to do what you think and what other people that work with you think is best. But at the same time, while people are there to help you, you are accountable for the decisions you make because those are yours. So that's sort of the trade-off, but it's one of the interesting things and things I appreciate about working at Facebook. All right, last one. Okay, so this is perhaps my biggest learning in my time at Facebook, and it's people is greater than product. So what does this mean? When I came to Facebook and became a PM, I had all these exciting things I wanted to learn. Product strategy, market analysis, customer segmentation, data analytics. And I learned all of these in some extent. But the thing I learned the most, by far, is how to deal with people. And I think it's just simple. Even though you're a product manager and you don't have, many of you may not have anyone reporting to you, your job is literally all about people. And this is because of the nature of the role. You're not an engineer shipping code. You're not a designer building specs. Your job is to convince other people to do things. And that's why the best PMs and your output is just based on the influence that you're able to have. And so success is dependent on driving alignment, convincing leadership to resource your project, recruiting people to join your team. And that's actually the things I've learned the most about in my past around 2 years of Facebook. And it's not something I expected when coming in, because when you're preparing for interviews, you don't really think about any of these things. You think about analytics and execution and product sense, which are all important. But at the job, I've actually found the people component to be the most important. The last thing I'll say also is that the product problems have been hard, but it's definitely the people problems that have kept me up at night. Because when you have disagreement amongst your team or you're not able to get people to join, those are things that are affect you more personally than a product strategy problem because it's a distance from you. So yeah, those I think are my big takeaways. I'm going to now open the room to questions.
David Rogers, teaching Columbia Business School in town. Just talking about that. I think very helpful, interesting insight to what you were. A question on the resourcing. So really interesting in terms of your point of view, headcount being harder than money and so forth, and how that sort of works. And this may depend on the different projects you've been, but what's the cycle on that? So are you headcount, maybe it's money too, is that something you get initial allocation and then you've got to show, make the case again in 60 days, in 12 months? And
Yeah.
what drives that when you have shorter versus?
Yeah, good question. So just repeating the question for those of you in the back, I believe the question was, what is the planning cycle for headcount or resourcing? This was referring to a point I'd made about how resourcing was one of the difficult things, getting people on your team. So at a company level, we plan on a 6-month basis, a plan on halves. And so finance and leadership sets the budget for different areas at that 6-month increment. Staffing for each team really varies because products are spun up and shut down at different points in the cycle, which means that there's different levels of resourcing available. I would generally say that if you're pitching a new product, what you're going to start with is, okay, to build like the basic version of this, how much support will I need? Then you get that commitment. And then you show, okay, with this many people on my team, I will be able to do X. Given that you're able to achieve X, or hopefully crush expectations and do better, then you can be like, okay, we've done so well, I want more people on my team. This is generally how it works. So to short answer, really planning is done on the half basis, and this is when your like teams and your managers will be asked like, how much resourcing do you need, and it bubbles up. But it's pretty fluid on a regular basis, especially if you have ideas. Does that answer your question? Cool.
So it's structured as sort of a step or two above on the sort of project or idea basis. It's very fluid. It's not fixed to a certain.
Yeah, generally it's pretty fluid.
Quarter or something.
Yep. Yeah. Cool. Once again, just state your name. Yeah.
It's good to see a Wolverine.
Go blue.
Yeah,
Go blue.
Man. Yeah.
Oh, nice. Another one.
Thank you, and thank you for the very honest.
Yeah, no problem.
I'm a software engineer myself. I'm from India. I'm living here now for the last couple of months. I have a question. When you bring an idea or a concept which you want to build, or you see a demand or a need, and as you enroll engineers and stakeholders onto your project, if there is a technical feedback, like let's say that your algorithms are not giving you the desired results, or the databases are running a bit slow, how much do you have to get involved to overcome that, or do you say that, hey, let engineering handle that?
Yeah, good question. So I think succinctly the question was, when you're working on new ideas and there's a technical speed bump, something is not working as you wanted it to work, how much does a PM need to get involved in that? So yeah, this is an interesting one because I think it varies based on the scenario. Usually, initially, I try to let the engineering teams deal with it. And this is not because I'm not interested, but because I think that they are the best and most capable and most equipped to deal with it. And my way of partnership with an engineer and my engineering manager and my technical leads is just keep me abreast of what you're doing. So they'll let me know that there's an issue and they're trying to work it out. Depends on how big it gets to be. That's when you get into more conversations that the PM is getting involved in. Usually these go in a couple directions. One, it's that, hey, this is way more complicated than we thought it would be. We're going to need more time and or people to help us out. And that's where the PM gets involved. Like, okay, what does this mean? Do we need to change our product timeline? Do we need to recruit more people and get more resourcing? So that's one example of what this is. The second example is, hey, what we thought we wanted to do isn't even possible, right? Like we can't do this, so we're gonna have to build something different. And that's when you get into like another point that PMs get involved. So, okay, like we wanted to do A, we can't do that. Can we do B, which is sort of there, but not exactly the same thing. So I think that the succinct answer is on like a very feature level, usually engineers can handle it. But when it comes to questions around, okay, this is going to fundamentally change the timeline, the amount of people that are required or actual product, I do jump in as a PM and help out.
Just a follow-up.
Yeah.
So what you're saying is generally product architecture, that's not where a PM gets involved? Or?
Yeah, so I'm going to caveat, like this is the question was, the follow-up was, do PMs not get involved in product architecture? Obviously caveating, this is just based off my experience, and so like not representative. I have generally worked, I would say, if you rate the things I do from least technical to most technical, somewhere around a 4, right? there are PMs that work on more technical products and they are getting more involved in technical architecture. I would say in the things that I am involved in, I get involved with the technical architecture in the inception of the product, and then we agree to it. But in the execution of it, it's usually the engineering teams, unless there's a big issue that comes up. If that helps, really.
Thank you.
Cool. Yes.
So I'm Nino, a French student at Berkeley.
Cool.
You seem to say that product management is a lot about soft skills, and soft skills are almost impossible to teach. So if you were a teacher at product school, what would you teach and how?
Yeah, good question. So the question was, I have implied a lot that product management involves a lot of soft skills, and soft skills are harder to teach. So if you were a teacher at product school, what would you teach and how? Very good question. So I'm actually not, I don't think that product management is only about soft skills. I think the thing I'm trying to say is that people often only focus on the hard skills and then don't focus on the soft skills. And this is perhaps by nature of the interview process, where some of the company's interviews are focused a lot on the hard skills. And so that's why people focus on product sense and execution. So I absolutely think all those things are really important to be able to get a job as a PM and then do a job well as a PM. But I think what I'm trying to say is that when I think about a lot of the successful PMs that have worked with me, the big difference that I see in their work, and then especially as we line into leadership roles, is the quote unquote soft skills. In terms of what I would teach, that's a good one. I think there's this interesting thing of like, to what extent of this can you teach versus not teach? If I was a teacher at product school, one of the things I would love to do is like role play or scenario analyses of, okay, here are the problems that you could run into, right? People are not being convinced on your team. You run into this bug, and how would you respond in each of these scenarios? But yeah, I think I would agree with the premise that soft skills are a little harder to teach. I'm not saying that's the only thing that's important. Does that make sense? Cool.
So my question relates to how you mentioned how you worked on such diverse products and that product culture really differs across teams, right? So what did you see was the common thread between your products and what was most different?
Oh, yeah, so the question is, I worked on a couple products, and product culture varies a little bit across Facebook. So what was the common thread, and what was different? I think the common thread, when you think about there's a couple things. When you think about Facebook's strategy as a company, it is to connect people. It's taken many manifests of that, but that's the most important thing. And so when we think about what we want to build, it is how can we build things that can help people connect? What this looks like on Facebook is very obvious, but when we think about virtual and augmented reality, our goal is actually to make this the next computing platform. And so that in 10 years that you will be able to work with someone that is halfway across the globe, but feel in the same room. My way of saying this is that when you approach problems, there's always that social and people lens that is there for everything we do, and that is permanent across the company. This is different than, for example, like a company that's Sony that is producing a VR headset, and their biggest goal is to get people just into games, right? For us, games is sort of the medium to the end. And so using Oculus as an example, and you can see this everywhere. So I think to some extent, like the social and people-based strategy is the same across the company, and it's something we focus on. The other thing that's the same, I think across the company, there's a pretty good bar for the people you work with. I think we have some awesome people, really talented and skilled in all roles. So I think the people are something common that's been there across the role. And all PMs and all people, when you join Facebook, you go through an onboarding and a PM onboarding. And so a lot of the lingo and the basic principles that you're using are very much the same. So Facebook has this product framework called Understand, Identify, Execute, which pretty much means you start with understanding the problem, figuring out what are we trying to achieve, what are the goals we want to set, then identifying, figuring out and narrowing down what are the customer segments and user segments we want to target, where do we fit in the competitive environment, and then finally execute, which is actually building it. And that is a framework that we've used throughout. The differences I talked about in the slide, it's mostly about how you take these shared values and these people and you execute on them. And I think those differences manifest into different products. Okay. Cool. Okay, one question in front, yeah.
What's next for you?
So this question was simple, what's next? Actually, what is your name? Let me ask that.
So my name is Erwan.
Okay.
things are at UC.
Cool. So what's next to me? I am currently working on, still continuing to work on virtual reality. So I'm working on the homepage thing that I talked about and some other project. So that is the what is going on right now. I don't have an answer to what is next because I'm enjoying what I'm doing right now. Yeah. There was another hand. Yes.
Right. So you talked about people keeping you up at night. So what about like how much of your time is spent with people management or crisis management, and then what are your kind of go-tos for like diluting that or dealing with it? And then what about like when you talk about your onboarding or team chemistry, sort of like tips or go-tos?
Okay. So I think there's two sub questions. The first is how much time of your time is spent in quote unquote people or crisis management, and how do you deal with that? And the second is what are your tips for onboarding onto a new team? Is that
or building team chemistry?
Or building team chemistry? Okay. So as I said, no one reports to me, so I'm not officially a people manager. There are engineering managers and like managers of product managers, so I don't actually manage anyone. And so like the day-to-day, the more HR-oriented functions about giving people performance reviews and hiring, I'm like affiliated, but not really involved with that. So I actually don't spend that much time formally. I do spend a considerable amount of time, and it varies from time to time, on like making sure that the people around me are motivated about what we want to do, on making sure that everyone's aligned on the strategy that we've built. And this tends to vary based on where you are in the planning cycle and where you are in the life cycle of a product. I would say earlier on, when you're building a new strategy, trying to hire new people, build a team, you're more involved with that, and I would spend more percent of time. When you're in the quote unquote execution phase and we're actually building features, probably less so. In terms of like tips for crisis management, yeah, this is one of those where like it really varies a lot from scenarios. One of the things and this leads to the second question you were asking, is when you join a new team, it's really important to spend time with each of the key stakeholders you're going to work with and build a common trust. And one of the things that I've come to really understand is it's important to know what they think is important. So what are their goals? Why are they in this thing? What makes them happy? What makes them not happy? And when you have that context in mind, it is really helpful when you're working and have quote unquote crises. Because like people crises are about when people have differences in opinion or differences in perspective. And when you can understand what's important to someone, that helps you resolve it. Leading to the second part of your question, I think when you join, one of the things that I've had the experience of doing is joining a bunch of new teams. And I think it's really important to not only read up on what the team is doing, but read up on what the people in the team are. What are the engineers, set up time to get to know them on a social level, and that just makes life much easier. And I often think that some of the mistakes I've made is focused a lot on the first part, which is learning about the product and not as much about the people. And then you get into scenarios where it's like a couple months in and you're now in like a disagreement with someone, and you realize you never really got to know them. So that I think is important to do at the beginning.
So what would you say are top 3 tips to get into a PM job?
Oh, top 3 tips to get into a PM job. So I am probably like not the best person to answer this. There's a lot of other resources that Product School provides and other books provide to answer this. I'll say like what helped me in terms of getting a PM role. First, I think you need to have a very convincing answer, not only for others, but to yourself as to why you want to do this. And I think that really helps differentiate you in the interview. And by this, I mean why you want to be a PM and why you want to work at X company. At the end of the day, there's a lot of people that will study up on interviews, but that sometimes make the difference. It's like why do you care about this? The other thing that I think is important, especially when you think about interviews, I think it's pretty valuable to do some practice. I would say that it's not like consulting or investment banking or engineering interviews where people are doing like rounds of lead code or HackerRank. There's not much of an equivalent for PM, and it's pretty hard for to do that. But it is helpful to do a couple practice interviews so that someone else can give you feedback on how you communicate, especially in a pressure situation. Are you talking too fast? Is your story straight? Are you able to explain things differently? And what that helps you understand is what is the difference between what's in your brain and what you think you're saying and what you're actually saying. So that's the second one. Third one, in the interview process, and this is like a personal opinion, but this was actually a tip that was given to me by someone who's presenting at product school a while back. So I'm just going to re-narrate this. Was a lot of interview processes are pretty competitive, and the way it works at a lot of companies, not all companies, is that there is a set of interviewers that you will interview with, and they all have to give you feedback, and they have to say pretty much somewhere between we want to love this person, we want to hire them, or not at all, and it could go somewhere in between. And in a lot of places, it is important for you to have at least one person who says, yes, we love this person. I want to hire them. I want them on my team. So what that means is that you need to have at least one interview where you really crushed it. So implication in terms of preparation process, especially when you can think about product sense interviews, less so like on the analytical and the execution interviews, but on the product sense interviews, it's awesome if you can challenge yourself and give answers that are really creative and really out of the box. What you want to think about is, so this person has given this question maybe 20 times in the past. They're going to be writing feedback maybe 2 days later. Are you going to stand out? And there's a lot of good answers, but then there's an amazing answer. So succinctly, that would be my third tip, which is really keep that perspective in mind and try to be very creative and take a little bit of a risk in terms of some of the questions that you're answering. Because I think in the end, it's worth it.
I'm a grad student at Resour. So as a student, I have a doubt that how does recruiters scan people for the skills they're looking for to enroll as a student? So I just want to know what kind of skills or tools a person should have for getting into the basic.
Yeah, I think the question is, what are the skills or tools that one should have, and what is a recruiter even looking for? I don't have the answer. I have not been in that position myself, and perhaps a recruiter can answer it better. I do know it's a hard job. They have to look at thousands of resumes. I'm not sure how much of it is the quote unquote skills. I think it's probably more about the experiences. I think that there's a set of things that one can teach. For example, if you're applying for a PM role and you have like SQL on your resume, I don't know how impressive that is to someone or whether that's going to make a big difference, because we at Facebook think that that's something that you can easily teach to someone versus having experiences in leadership, whether that be at a company or a nonprofit or a school club, and coming up with new ideas, like building a hack. Like those, I think, are more important. So having the relevant skill, the experiences, in my opinion, for a PM role, more important than having the right skills. Yep.
The question I have is there anything that you particularly dislike about being a product manager?
Is there anything that you particularly dislike about being a product manager? Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's like this I hate. But one of the things I think about a lot is when I compare this to software engineering, one of the things I loved about being an engineer is that you can build something, you can write some code, and you can ship it, and then there's this instant gratification of, okay, I built this and I can see this work. And there's really not that in PM, right? You can it takes a long time between when you have articulated a strategy and something is actually working. Right? You will publish something and be like, okay, this is what I think we need to do. And then people will debate it, and then you'll align on it. Then you'll decide the goals. Then you'll get resourcing, and then you'll build something. And so there's a long time, and there's very little instant gratification in a lot of scenarios. So it's not that I hate about it, but that's just something that sometimes frustrates you. And it's also because it goes back to the influencing people. You can't do anything yourself. You need to convince others. And so there's a lot of times where I just don't want to deal with anyone. I don't want to have any meetings. I wish I could just code this myself. And that's just not the case in the PM role. So not so much something you hate, but something you have to get used to. And that's a difference between this role and others. Any last questions? All right. If not, thank you so much. This was a lot of fun. Enjoyed it.